welcome to TBN Israel, the podcast. This is the second time that we're doing this, Mati.
We've made it 2 whole weeks.
Yeah. So I'm Yair Pinto, and with me is Mati Shoshani.
I'm Mati Shoshani, that's right. And we're here because we wanted a way to talk and communicate more in depth about what's been happening in this part of the world.
Yes, there's many things that are happening in Israel and in the Middle East, and we want to break these topics down so that you, wherever you are, if it's in the United States, if it is in Fiji, if it's in the, I don't know, some island, you need to understand why is what's happening on the borders of Israel relevant for you. And it is because whatever is happening in the Middle East never stays here.
100%.
Yeah, we are living in a global society and everything has an effect on each other. Okay, so
I mean, it's more than that. Like the things that happen in this part of the world, they don't make sense if you don't understand the background to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a time and a place for everything. Like there's, a YouTube reel is good, but it doesn't tell you the whole story.
Yeah.
So we're here to tell not the whole story, but at least a more in-depth version of what's been happening. And as far as I'm concerned, it's an opportunity to get to sit and talk because we don't get that very often.
Yeah, definitely. And it's fun also. I think that when we are trying to explain what's happening, personally, I understand more of the situation.
When you get to talk through it.
Yeah.
100%.
No, definitely. So today we are going to talk about the IDF's upcoming operation in Rafah. Rafah is located in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
It's a city, a Palestinian city in the Gaza Strip on the border with Egypt. Okay, on a normal life, meaning before this war started, Rafah was a very poor city. It has a pathway that leads between the Sinai Peninsula, which is Egypt, and the Palestinian enclave, which is the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
So some goods were transferred from Egypt into Gaza, from Gaza into Egypt. It's basically kind of a port city, but from the ground. And during war times, and sadly in the past 20 years, also ammunition, smuggling, drugs, all kinds of bad stuff are being transferred there.
Yeah. And let's recap on how we got to today. So everyone around the world who's covering the Israel story is talking about what happens next. And what happens next is Israel, the government, the army have been alluding to the fact that we're re-entering Gaza.
Yeah.
We're re-entering Gaza with the purpose of taking over the last sort of stronghold of Hamas, which is Rafah, in Hebrew, Arabic, Rafah. And the point of that is to eliminate what's left of the large-scale resistance of Hamas and to finish the sort of ground maneuver that we started months ago, back in late November when we entered.
Yeah, so there was a few stages of this operation against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So the goals were to dismantle the military and civil administration of Hamas and return the hostages.
Yeah.
That's the official goals, still remains, and we didn't achieve that yet because Hamas is still governing the Gaza Strip, and the hostages are still not home with their families.
Over 100 of them are still not returned.
Yeah, so these are the goals. And the steps in order to achieve these goals are a few. So the first one was an aerial strike against the strongholds of Hamas. Then the second one was a ground maneuver into the Gaza Strip. And then the third one is to withdraw from the Gaza Strip and then conduct surgical operations against the remaining Hamas terror cells inside Gaza, which is where we are now.
Exactly.
Okay? And it's a very hard stage in general, because I would say it's very hard to determine who's a terrorist and who's not, especially because now Hamas became a terror guerrilla organization and not an army that it was when we just entered and began the ground operation.
Well, partially, because I think you raise a really good point, which is what is left of Hamas. And I think in the collective mind, people would imagine, look, we battled them for several months. The majority of their loosely defined battalions and regiments, they've been dismantled, they've been arrested, they've been eliminated for the most part. But that's not fully true. It's the northern ones of those battalions that have been dismantled. And in the southern part, and again, Gaza's like this elongated, north-south sort of strip.
Yeah.
In the southern side of it, you have now, a huge concentration of population. over 1 million refugees who fled from northern Gaza, Bet Lahia, Bet Hanun, all these different cities that make up the northern and central part of Gaza. They're all now in the south. They're all concentrated there, and so are many of the Hamas combatants, many of the Hamas units that are still in existence.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that the reason that all these civilians are now concentrated in the southern part of the Gaza Strip is because the IDF is announcing each location that is about to invade or to attack. And then it gives time for the civilian population to move south to a safe area. So in order for the IDF to conduct all its operations against the northern battalions of Hamas in Gaza City, in the Rafah, in Khan Yunis, which is a terrible place, by the way. And it tells the civilian population to move south, and then it operates.
Yeah.
And now we have a problem because we have more than 1 million civilians that moved south.
On top of the people who already lived there.
Which is
These
like a 250,000 that were living in really poor conditions if you talk about it in a Western eye. Like the running water is very hard to achieve, health conditions, sanitary conditions.
Before the war.
Before the war started.
Before the war,
Yeah. So the situation is very complicated. And now what the IDF needs to do, which we'll get to that later, is basically to, again, take care of these civilians so that we can get to business against the terrorists, the last remaining terrorists.
Yair, this is not theoretical for you, though. You've been in Gaza in this last war.
In this war, basically.
When you think about what's happening over there now, the idea, the concept of going back in, because for the most part, the IDF has, I wouldn't say we've been waging full war, we've been securing and holding part of the Gaza Strip.
Yes.
You were there in the early stages of the battle. When you look at what's happening now, what awaits the IDF, what goes through your mind?
Well, first of all, I don't envy those who will go back into that place. In general, the Gaza Strip is like a terrible, terrible hub of terrorists. And you can feel, spiritually speaking, you can feel evil when you enter these streets. And everywhere you look, they used schools, United Nations buildings, humanitarian facilities as their military bases from which they open fire towards our soldiers. It's just terrible. And you can see how they use the civilian population as human shields. And everywhere you step, there is an underground tunnel, and a terrorist can pop out of there. So it's like you walk there and you feel like it's a ghost town. There's nobody in the streets. It's just empty. So after a few days, you become like, okay, so this is safe. I'm a bit bored. And then a terrorist pops out and fires an RPG at one of your troops. And that's what's been going on there for months and months and months. So the fighting became very, very hard also to keep the morale of the soldiers high. It's also to keep the like the operational alertness. I know that you for sure had to deal with this issue here in the West Bank for the 6 months to keep the soldiers sharp when they see cats and
Next week I'm hitting the 7-month mark in reserves.
I think you should just return to be a full, full-time military career man instead of doing this 50-50. But anyway, just to keep it short and into perspective, Gaza Strip has been planned and designed as a terror base for 20 years. Okay, so this is why it's taking us so long to dismantle the Hamas infrastructure in these areas. And I think that the hardest part is the humanitarian situation in Rafah. And how do we enter without harming the civilian population, while Hamas knows that that's their best key. The best card for them is to harm the civilian population as we enter.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's worth harping on. The public opinion battle over this topic tries to frame the conversation in aggressors and defenders. And in reality, it's far more complex than that. You described the life inside the Gaza Strip. What it is, what they've set up is a society that is solely focused on an armed conflict. Solely focused. And everything they do, from the school system in kindergarten, through their construction projects, through their infrastructure projects, everything they do is all bent, all directed towards armed conflict and violence towards the state of Israel.
Yeah.
That is them. That is them from every level, every angle of society. And they've been very consistent about that. Their humanitarian aid is focused on that. Their social welfare programs are focused on that. The way they build underground facilities, above ground facilities, the way they spend their money, the way they use, everything that's been donated to them over the years, everything is focused on trying to kill the Israeli people. And with that goes the saying that if all you're doing is focusing on destroying your enemy, you're doing nothing to protect your own people.
Yes.
And now we're at this position, and this will lead into sort of the next topic of how do you move into Rafah with so many civilians there, and why are they all there? Where for the Israeli army to take over the Gaza Strip and dismantle Hamas, it's not as if there's an organized army. You can't just say, now we're gonna engage with battalion number 7, and when we finish engaging with them, there'll be POWs. No, they're deeply embedded into the society.
Yeah.
They're hiding within the civilian population, and the civilian population is highly supportive for the most part of everything they do.
Yeah.
And now so we had to go through this long process of slowly, as you're describing it, taking over from the north and then from the central part of Gaza on the eastern border of the Gaza Strip, slowly pushing downwards and westwards, pushing the population and the terrorists. And today, we're at a position where in northern Gaza, there are several 100,000, Palestinian civilians and combatants, because they've been firing again from that area. And in central Gaza, there are several 100,000 civilians in that area. But there's a huge contingency of refugees and Hamas combatives, and this is important to say,
Together, yes.
who are mixed together in a densely populated and poorly assembled area.
Yeah.
And in that area now, we go into the humanitarian side of things, as you describe. You have a poorly built city, and on top of that, a tent city that's been constructed recently, and we'll go later on in depth into all the international aid and support that's going into the Gaza Strip.
Let me just add something regarding the connection between the people of Gaza and Hamas.
Yeah.
So for us in Western countries, if you want your son to be successful or have a good job, it means that he should be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or one of these jobs. In the Gaza Strip, the best professions are tunnel diggers and rocket launchers.
All terrorism related.
If you want to make money and have a good living for your family, you need to have a good job inside the Hamas terrorist organization. That's like the only way to advance in this system in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
It's very important to understand. It's kind of a trap that feeds itself. So if you want to have a better future for your family, and it's hard, the Gaza Strip is a poor, it's not even a country, but it's a poor area that in order to succeed there, you need to play by the rules.
Yeah.
And sadly, the rules were written by Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. So it's very hard to get the civilian people outside of this.
Is Hamas really only a terrorist organization? Because that's where I think it gets super murky. Because Hamas is both a terrorist organization in the classical sense of it, of they get financial aid and then they use it to buy weapons and fight.
Yeah.
But they're also a humanitarian aid organization, Dawah. They started out as an Islamic relief organization. They're also the elected government to a certain degree of the Gaza Strip. And they're also like a financial stronghouse. They're the powerhouse that funds the entire Gaza Strip. And Rafah, as we say in English, is exactly that. It's the artery that connects between the Gaza Strip and let's call it the smuggling channels, or the smuggling underground channel that is the border between the Sinai Peninsula and Rafah. And there's this very tenuous relationship between the people of Gaza and the Egyptian government, where the Egyptians they're at odds with the Hamas organization, but at the same time, there's a whole underground economy, no pun intended, of smuggling incredible amounts of goods and weaponry in and out of the Gaza Strip, and also an economy now of people paying to get out of the Gaza Strip.
How much is it? About like $3,000?
I've heard it's like $3,000 to $5,000 per person to get out of the Gaza Strip. And of course, here's the hypocrisy of the Hamas organization. Of course, the sons of many of the Hamas leaders fled well before this ever started. and they're in
hotels in Qatar or other places.
5-star
Turkey.
deluxe hotels in other countries, partying and doing charity supercar races for. This really happened.
No, definitely. I know.
The fundraise, quote unquote, for the. You can't see me. I'm doing air quotes. The fundraise for this, but it's this crazy economy where the Hamas is both a terrorist organization and the one who's executing violence on its own people and Israel, its sworn enemy, and at the same time, they're still this financial organization, and they're essentially taxing everything that's going through the Gaza and Egypt border.
Yeah. They tax also food.
They're taxing the humanitarian aid that they're stealing and then reselling at a premium cost.
Or they take the humanitarian aid and destroy it so that
people are hungry.
So people will not have, the availability to reach food easy. And also, I want to say something about the Sinai Peninsula. Okay, people think like, okay, it's Egypt, it's a country, but Sinai is kind of like the Wild West.
Yeah,
like Egypt has a few Egyptian policemen there trying to assert some law and order, but it's just
really big. It's just a really, really big desert area. Yeah,
it's a huge desert, and not long ago, the Islamic State, Daesh, used to control all this facility and smuggle weapons, and they still have some tribals, Bedouin tribes there, that are affiliated with the Islamic State. And these tribes are also smuggling weapons into the Gaza Strip, people, ammunition. So it's all an ecosystem of lawlessness and terrorism that is very hard to combat.
Yeah, and I think many people probably in the West are asking the question, why doesn't Egypt just open up their borders to the Hamas or to the people fleeing the Gaza Strip?
That's a good question.
And that's a very legit question. If I lived in the Gaza Strip right now and you were, your house had been destroyed, both by Hamas actions who ruined the economy and the society, but then, of course, Israel invades into the Gaza Strip, you would want to leave. Mm-hmm. And the Egyptians are preventing that, and they're preventing it because, and this is important to delay on, the Hamas is the enemy of the Egyptian government.
Yes.
There's this slogan thrown out there of Islamic solidarity. That doesn't
exist.
It doesn't exist in this. Yeah. It exists like as a cultural phenomenon or like a brotherhood level. But the Hamas is ideologically an opposing organization, an opposing ideology to that of the Egyptian government. Not only that, the organization that overthrew the Egyptian government
Muslim Brotherhood
was a Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood is ideologically aligned with the Hamas movement. Yeah. And so the Egyptian government knows that, and they fear the Hamas influence, and they fear the commerce that trades between the countries, between the Gaza Strip and Sinai. They fear the terrorism waves that demolish their economy for years, both in Sinai and then inside Egypt proper. Yeah. They're terribly afraid of that, and they respond accordingly.
Yeah. And in general, what you just said is very interesting. So there is no Islamic or Muslim Brotherhood, but what we do have is the enemy of my enemy
is my friend.
Yeah. And they're big on that, especially regarding to Israel. So you can see that Hamas, which are Sunni Muslims, are aligned with Shia Iran.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen anywhere else in the Middle East, unless if you talk about Israel. So that's the big issue. So if it's in order to kill Israel or the Jews or the United States, then we can be friends for now, and we'll get back to killing each other just a little later.
Frenemies is the word. We can go back to being frenemies.
No, look at it. Like Iran and Iraq were fighting wars because of this Sunni-Shia conflict. Saudi Arabia and Iran are fighting this war with the Houthis because of this Sunni-Shia conflict. And this is a core conflict in Islam. So I guess it's good. It's good that we are here, so we can, unite some people against us.
We need to clarify it also in our own heads. You've been doing the news for what, like 202 days now?
Yeah,
as we record this segment, 202 days straight of recording the news. Give us a breakdown. Like if you try to track all the events that have taken place in the Gaza Strip, like where are we now? Like where are the Hamas concentrated? Where are the people concentrated? And why has it taken so long for this maneuver to end?
Well, okay, at the beginning, we were attacking, as I said, an army of Hamas. It was an army, it was structured, they had bases inside schools, of course, inside the buildings, inside the, UN facilities and other places. And it was spread out between the northern part of the Gaza Strip, the center of Gaza Strip, and the southern part of the Gaza Strip. So the IDF has been dismantling this control system of Hamas. So at the moment, in order for Yahya Sinwar to tell his units in the northern part of Gaza to attack, not to attack, to release a hostage or to do something, it's almost impossible for him to send a message to them because the structure does not exist anymore. Okay? But on the other hand...
You mean like the communication chain?
Yeah, communication, command chain.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the people because most of the leaders are either eliminated, captured...
Or in hiding, yeah.
Or in hiding. And also the technological ability, because they've been using very advanced technologies in order to communicate amongst themselves inside the Gaza Strip. Maybe high-tech and also low-tech. Some of them might have been doing it with the flags and like simple people just looking at each other from different posts. But we've destroyed both of these abilities. So it's very hard for Hamas to conduct an organized war. But what they have left is their ideology, which that is almost impossible to dismantle because all of the militants and the people of Hamas and the civilian population of the Gaza Strip have been indoctrinated with this ideology against Israel, against the Jewish people, that in order for the Palestinians to have a future, they have to destroy Israel from the river to the sea. So even if you have one lone wolf terrorist somewhere in the north, he will operate according to this ideology. And that is very hard to battle as an army. That's why we are now at this stage of surgical operations trying to attack. But the one place that we still have leadership is Rafah. Okay? So the army is now training every day. We have plans that are being submitted to the government, to our allies in the United States, about what and how are we addressing this last issue of dismantling the remaining real leadership, military leadership of Hamas in Rafah. And that's the challenge now.
So if you ask the question of what's left of Hamas, the majority of their, let's call it northern and central battalions are eliminated. But where they still have an organized presence is in the south.
Correct.
Where they still have their supreme leader,
Yahya Sinwar.
Yeah. He's still somewhere in that area. We assume.
Yeah.
And what's I hate to say this, those who remain alive or under Hamas control of the Israeli captives are somewhere in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, in that area. And now we're at this this pressure point where all the problems collide in one place. The difficulty of extracting hostages in a densely populated area, that's there.
Super difficult. By the way, it was heartbreaking when we had these two hostages that
were accidentally killed.
That were accidentally shot IDF by our own soldiers. That was like heartbreaking for the Israeli morale.
Yeah.
And the trouble here is that Hamas knows that we care for each casualty. If it's a soldier, if it's a hostage, he knows that, and they are playing on our nerves and trying to get us to fight amongst each other. Only, yesterday, we saw the video of an Israeli hostage, Hirsch, that was released. And you see him with only one hand left, and he's accusing the Israeli government for not doing enough to release him. And of course, it's a script, and it's all a mind game of Hamas in order to break us and to break our unity as a country. That's the challenge. The longer this operation goes on, and the longer we take our time debating amongst ourselves and amongst international allies and countries, the stronger Hamas will get in this psychological warfare. And the harder it will be for us to move united.
I mean, it's been a very, very long time. When you think about it, these hostages have been there for over 6 months. And many of them, we haven't heard from them since October 7th or October 8th. And we know nothing about them. And you see these kind of videos that come out. Hirsch he's one of the, I'll call it one of the stronger campaigns for his release. His family's internationally, they've just had a huge international impact. But he himself, when in the video, yes, he's repeating the script, but he's also saying, I know that the state is doing everything they can to release me. and still sends his love to his mother.
Yeah.
It was a very touching moment there. So we're recapping. Here's the problem we're facing right now in Rafah, and then we'll get to why it's taken so long to get to this point. Excuse me. So we talked about the hostages. You have still the remaining battalions of Hamas in a densely populated and crowded area. You have over 1 million refugees. You have a humanitarian crisis, which is the result of 6 months of warfare. So food supply chains, problematic. Electricity, water supply,
Not
all
to talk
problematic.
about school systems and everything else.
Yeah, and even the aid organizations aren't functioning to the level that they should be functioning. So it's a very, very problematic issue to deal with. And all of that compounds with the international pressure that's now mounting.
Yeah.
Where the Israeli government sort of, pumped the brakes and said, this is several months ago now, hold on, we just can't keep on with the same MO, because what's happening now is we're, instead of clearing an area, we're having to move into an area that's full of population.
Yeah.
And just the thought of even having to try to send a military unit on foot or on tracks into a densely populated area, the casualty number is going to be incredibly high.
Oh, definitely.
And everyone's been trying to avoid that.
Plus,
that's what brings us to this point.
Completely. And another point is that Rafah is bordering Egypt.
Yeah.
So you have another country that you bring into the picture. It's not just us fighting a terrorist organization. There's another country next to us.
Yeah. There's a lot on the table.
So I think
let's touch on the international side of things, though.
Yeah, I wanted to say that also.
I was going to say, this is where things really get interesting.
Yeah.
And I'll say this just to set the stage. What's often in the press is not what happens in the back rooms. From what we know, in all these internal conversations that are happening between Israel and the U.S. and Israel and some of the Gulf states and Israel and other neighboring Arab countries, there's an ongoing communication that's happening that's highly collaborative. Let's put it that way.
Between us and the United States.
And us and our neighbors.
Yeah.
Us and our neighbors. And everyone has the same agenda. We want to end the war. We understand that Hamas has to be dismantled. We also understand that we have to, at the same time, in parallel, deal with the humanitarian crisis that's taking place in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and we need our neighbors as well for the day after. We need to have a strong, something that will manage all this Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you talk about our neighbors, we're talking about Egypt, about Jordan.
Yeah.
That's it, right? We don't have Lebanon is not in the picture here.
Yes, but
Syria.
All the Gulf states,
exist.
all the Gulf states have been part of this ongoing conversation that has to do. It's like this two-sided conversation. On the one hand,
protect the Palestinian civilians.
Well, I was going to say first we're protecting the civilians in the situation. So you have Jordan and the American government and others who are airdropping aid, and then shipping in aid, and then trucking in aid.
Sometimes,
into the Gaza Strip.
the parachute don't open, and then the aid hit the head of the people.
That was quite unfortunate. Yeah.
Or sometimes you see it landing in the sea, but that's also pretty.
Yeah. So on the one side, they're fighting really hard to protect the civilians, and also, and this is important to state, the state of Israel is heavily invested financially, manpower, IDF resources in helping the humanitarian situation inside the Gaza Strip. I mean, I'm setting aside, of course, the fact that we're at war and that war uses, weapons, but on the food and aid side of things, there's this nonstop effort to feed aid into the Gaza Strip. And at the same time, we're still at war.
Yeah.
So it's this very complex and tenuous relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And also, in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, some places are beginning to kind of resume normal life.
Yeah.
We saw footage of bakeries that were opened for the first time since the beginning of this war. And some civil administrations is trying to relaunch. But this is the challenge here, because on the one hand, you want to resume a normal life for the civilian population. But on the other hand, this is an opportunity for Hamas, and Hamas is taking that chance.
Yeah, 100%.
And regaining control. I mean, through youths that are basically, with bats bringing order into the streets, through taxes that it again is stealing from the population, because there is a power vacuum and Hamas will jump into that hole if somebody else will not.
Let's start breaking down. International relations are always complex, and in this situation, they're even more so. Like the agendas of the different parties that are at play here. And I'll start with our far neighbors. So we have what were we calling them? We're calling them the Gulf states, the UAE, Kuwait, other countries in that region.
Saudi Arabia?
According to
unofficially. Yes.
You have other countries in the region who want a stake and have a stake in what happens here. They have a stake in this conversation because they want to strengthen their financial, economic, geopolitical position in the region. And they're not doing that in a vacuum. They're doing it against or compared to, in relation to the Iranians, and in relation to and compared to the Turkish and
Russia,
the Russians,
Chinese,
and the Chinese,
North Korea,
and
all
yes,
the good
it's
guys.
like it's all these like weird like alliances. So these countries, and we have to say this because you really need to understand why they're doing this. These countries are investing in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas. They're investing in financial aid, but they were also part, and we talked about this in the previous podcast, they were also part of actively engaging against the Iranians when they were trying to strike Israel a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
So that's one party.
It's like you need to place your bet on one side or the other. And they're placing their bet with the United States, with Israel, with the Western coalition, and not with the Iranian, Russia, North Korea axis of evil, as we call them. So that's you have to choose a side. I think our world is teaching this to us again and again. You have to choose a side. You cannot be just on the sidelines anymore. I mean, not making a decision is a decision in 100%. Itself. And it's even more dangerous because then you lose either way. Because you didn't support the winning side, you didn't support the losing side. So you have to decide, and that's what they're doing. And they're doing it with a lot of influence, money, because they think of potential economic, geopolitical, strategic advantages and stuff that they can gain after this conflict will be over. That's super interesting.
So here, let's go like super complex. the United States. You look at them and like sometimes it's confusing because one day you'll have one headline and the following day the headline is exactly opposite to the things that were said the day before.
Well, like the U.S. is calling on Israel to stop the operation in the
all
Rafah
operations in Gaza. In Gaza. And then the next day it is
the U.S. sends $20 billion in military aid support to Israel.
And the only way to really like unpack that is to understand that even for the American government, this is a very hot potato to deal with, and especially for a Democratic president, at the end of this season in his political life and the life of his government, and especially with all the internal pressure and conflict that's happening in the U.S. I mean, I think you have President Biden is dealing with internal demonstrations, just like endless, and especially from like let's call it the academic elite against Israel. From within his own party, people calling him to seize all aid to Israel, not to limit, not to critique, not to check, to seize all aid to the state of Israel. And at the same time, he's looking at from like a defense perspective, in his mind, he's saying, what the hell? Definitely not.
Yeah.
These are our number one allies in the Middle East. We're not going to abandon them now.
They need, so there's politics, there's all this pressure about pro-Palestinian, economics and the American elections that is coming up. But if you look at it, at the facts and the pieces in the Middle East, the U.S. needs Israel to survive here in this region. Without Israel being strong here, America has a problem. It has no foothold, no significant foothold in this region. And then Russia and the other enemies, Iran, will step in really fast and take over basically a quarter of the world, or this big chunk of the world that is very volatile. So regardless of politics and of the elections, the U.S. needs Israel and Israel needs the United States. There are mutual interests here, strategic interests that are bigger than the politics. So if we see these headlines here and there, we need to remember that there are bigger interests at play that go beyond Democratic, Republicans, and the internal politics of Biden versus
it's
whoever.
Both, and that's the whole thing. Is you have to understand the agendas and the interests of the different countries both from an internal perspective and an external perspective. So again, to go back to the to the U.S., so you have the Democratic Party has a lot of people within it who are pro-Palestinian by default, I guess.
Yeah,
but the
you
American
have to,
yeah, they have to be, and because those are their constituency. And at the same time, you have the American government that when you look at their external agenda, they have to preserve and maintain their stance, their influence in this part of the world, because a projection of weakness in what's happening right now will project their interest, will hurt their interest in other parts of the world. And everyone's watching. The Chinese are watching, the North Korean are watching. Everyone is watching to see how this plays out. So you can't show a weak hand. And at the same time, you can't just be one-sided in your approach. So, which is why you hear like this duplicit message coming out of the U.S. government, where on the one hand they're calling for cease of all violence acts by the Israeli government,
sides,
highly critical of like the actions of the IDF, and the next day they vote on the biggest aid package we've ever received from the American government, and it's the same people. You just need to understand the agenda, and especially when you're looking towards an election season in the U.S. There's a lot of internal politics at play here, where they have to pander to the needs of the public in different sections and different constituencies. Even the foreign aid money is part of that, because, and I assume many people know this, American aid to different countries is usually money that's spent within the U.S.
Yeah, it stays in America.
Yeah, it stays within.
Just give money to people. There's no interest in that. Let's say, just for example, the aid money to Israel is to be used in order to purchase military equipment, military capabilities from American companies.
Yeah.
So it goes back to feed the American economy. Of course, it helps us because we use these technologies in order to defend ourselves. Yeah. But that's the picture. Nobody's giving free money to anybody.
No free meals anywhere. Yeah. No. So we've been sort of playing pause in the Gaza Strip for several months now. Everyone's been sort of waiting for what unfolds.
Yes.
And so we have we talked about the humanitarian situation down south. We talked about the military, let's call it challenges that we're facing, of having to try to fight and complete this maneuver that we have to complete, because you can't just leave the Hamas and all the hostages there without finishing what you started. That's for the state of Israel.
And for the world.
Yeah.
If you let this terrorist organization survive, it will spread, it will grow.
It already has. It already has, yeah. And an international pressure mounting, and it's all coming to this pressure point, which brings us to today. And today, the IDF, the Israeli government, and this is not hinting at this point, this is openly saying, we are going to finish what we started in the Gaza Strip, and it's going to include Rafah. Prime Minister Netanyahu openly said more than once, there is a date for the next move in Rafah. IDF units have been called up back to reserves. Again, there's nothing secretive here.
They told them even when they were released a few months ago that in May they're going to be called back again.
People are being called back to finish the land maneuver in the Gaza Strip, and that brings us to where we are today, where this huge challenge on a humanitarian level, on an international level, on a diplomatic level, and also even internally in Israel, there's mounting pressure against the government. There's mounting pressure for the resignation of leaders of the country who are involved in what we count internally as the failure of October 7th. And I think it would be hard to argue that it isn't a substantial or catastrophic even failure on a leadership level. And all of that is bringing us to today. And then the question is, what next? Where do we go from here next? Okay,
so let me just share what is the humanitarian plan for the Rafah operation. So basically, before this operation can move forward, there's a plan. It involves 4 stages. So the first stage is basically ensuring ongoing humanitarian support for the civilian population in Rafah. And this is done by trucks, by air support, by sea. That will be a bit in the future, once the seaport will be completed. The second part is providing essential water, communications,
the basics,
sewage needs for the population. Okay. The third thing is health. Okay. So Israel needs to make sure that the Gaza Strip has at least 10 working, functioning hospitals. That's a lot. 10 hospitals is not a small thing, but these are field hospitals.
Close to what we have in the entire country of Israel.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very important also to say that regarding hospitals and what's going on in Gaza, people are still giving birth in the Gaza Strip, and despite all this hard situation, the Palestinian population is still growing, multiplying, and functioning under these hard conditions. Okay, so this is something that Israel needs to take care of. And the fourth stage is to enter 40,000 tents that will basically house all these refugees in it. I think that a good part of the timing of the situation is that winter is behind us, so we don't need to shelter them against rain and other, bad conditions. But on the other side, it's very hot, super hot. It's like 40 degrees Celsius. So it's not...
110 Fahrenheit,
yeah.
For those who speak in imperial and not in metric.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the situation, and it's very hard, and it takes a long time to do these things, to provide water, to build tents, to bring humanitarian aid. And before the operation will start, we need to make sure that all this humanitarian situation is taken care of.
I mean, this is where leadership gets super tricky. Where if you ask the question of, so do we need to finish the maneuver against Hamas? Do we need to disarm the Hamas? Do we need to free the hostages? Do we need to care for the humanitarian crisis? Do we need to rebuild the Gaza Strip? Do we need to find an international solution? Do we need to resolve the international pressure that's bearing down on Israel?
The answer is yes.
Yes,
yes,
period, to all. And I just get in the mind of like our government's leadership, and also the other countries around us that are involved in this. This is a very, very tricky, situation to maneuver. And to do it wisely, you really have to be playing multiple games at the same time, which we are. At the same time as we're, gearing up to finishing with Hamas, to finishing the military move against Hamas, we're also working on the plan for the next day. And this is
That's a huge plan.
All over the news of, we're talking multiple countries, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild the Gaza Strip, to restore the economy, to rebuild the government within the Gaza Strip. But at the same time, you can't just do it with the people that are currently in government. And the PLO, or the Palestinian Authority, they're unwilling to be part of that until the issue in the Gaza Strip is resolved. Yeah. They learned the hard way what it
were thrown out of buildings last election.
Yeah. When we say they were thrown out of Gaza, that's not a figurative term; it was a literal term.
Yeah. Like one day after the election in the Gaza Strip, basically Hamas threw them off buildings.
Yeah. So it's this multifaceted challenge where you have to dismantle Hamas on a government and military level and a financial level. You have to take away their power. You have to rebuild the government within the Gaza Strip, and at the same time resolve the refugee situation that exists there, the humanitarian crisis, and militarily end the Hamas.
And all this in 3 weeks. That's the time frame that we have.
Very, very
the estimated time frame.
Very tall order.
Yeah.
So we're looking at all those games sort of playing out, and when you understand how complex and how heavy it is, suddenly it makes sense.
Yeah.
Suddenly you can understand why the headlines are so confusing. Why we flip-flop, day after day from, one day we're talking about, the U.S. government is calling for, the dismantling of IDF units, specific ones, to the next day we're getting aid, to the next day we're talking to the UAE, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Americans, the who knows who, on rebuilding the government within the Gaza Strip. It's all happening at the same time, and we're really at a deadline. We're at a deadline where you just can't indefinitely draw out the war. You can't indefinitely on multiple levels. It's been painful for everyone involved. And our government is pressed to the wall to bring things not to an end fully, but at least to a point of maturity where we can move to the next phase.
Definitely. And also on a soldier point of view, it's very hard to just prepare and plan.
Yeah.
And we've been fighting. People left their homes, like you, for 6 months, their jobs, their homes, and have been fighting. We need to see the end goal, the reason, and that end is either capturing or neutralizing Yahya Sinwar, releasing the hostages, dismantling the remaining control of Hamas, stop the rocket fire towards Israel. Only yesterday we had rockets being flown from the center of the Gaza Strip and the north of the Gaza Strip towards Israeli cities. And these is areas that the IDF destroyed, the Hamas control of them months ago.
Yeah.
So this is very, very tough. And
let's delay on what you just said. This isn't a one-off kind of thing. You can't just like conquer a territory in the Gaza Strip.
You need to replace the leadership with something.
And you also have to maintain a military presence there, which we haven't done for the most part. In much of the Gaza Strip, the IDF no longer holds the entirety of the
we have like one brigade there, right?
Yeah,
something
I mean, and we have different assets on the ground, but we're not controlling the civilian population. We're not controlling the population in general to a complete degree. There's freedom of movement to a certain degree now where people are moving back and forth. And places that 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago had 0 terrorists now have a number that isn't 0. So we really have to deal with this situation. And when you understand the urgency of like, no, this problem is not going to go away. We must deal with it.
Yeah.
We must act. And at the same time, we have to do it in such a wise manner so as not to cause a additional or further humanitarian crisis, to not anger our partners further. There's really a lot at the table.
I don't envy the decision makers in this situation. It's crazy. And I think that we finished explaining about what's going on. Where is Rafah? What are the challenges that the IDF, that Israel, that the international community, that the Gazan civilians are facing in this situation? And there are many challenges. But what's the plan for the day after? Is there a plan for the day after? What is Israel going to do with the Gaza Strip? Do you have an answer?
No. No one has an answer. Yeah. And I think because this is the challenge with these kind of problems, is these problems require multiple steps. And once there's multiple steps and multiple variables, it's impossible to predict what will happen next. One step forward. This is a 5-step forward problem.
And a 20-year step.
Yeah, because you have to, exactly. You have to disassemble the Hamas, rebuild civil governance within the Gaza Strip that isn't Hamas-based, then start dealing with a population whose sole ideology is the call for the death and destruction of Israel. Like, you really can't partner with people whose, their national agenda, their national anthem, so to speak, is kill the Jews. There's no one.
Their textbooks for the kids are to paint how Israelis are being murdered and soldiers are being kidnapped. Yeah, that's like their Boy Scouts.
It's what did the American government say when they went into both Afghanistan and Iraq? It's winning the hearts and souls. Yeah. So you need to rebuild that, like civil level relationship between the people. You need to rebuild the sort of the conversation between the Palestinian people, the Israeli people, the international community, and bring an international regional alliance to even be able to talk about what happens on the next day. And in all that process, the Israeli army and defense sort of apparatus can't just say, okay, we're going to sit here waiting for things to happen. No. You have to act now. You have to dismantle Hamas now. You have to protect the Israeli civilians now.
And you know why now? Yeah. Because we have another front. We have almost 100,000 Israelis that are that are not in their houses in the northern border with Lebanon. So we cannot just wait with the situation against Hezbollah while we are talking and debating on Hamas. Yeah. We have multiple issues on the table.
If you're talking about displaced populations, this is an often forgot thing. In my community, we still have displaced people from northern Israel that are living in the hotel in our community because they can't return to their home. Israel has been, de facto, we've been at war with Hezbollah. We've had to evacuate close to 100,000 Israeli civilians from their homes in northern Israel without the ability to return to those places. We have entire communities on the Gaza Strip that have yet to return to their homes. So the pressure, it's both a financial and, of course, a social pressure on our government.
Yeah, people live in hotels for 6 months, like in a hotel room. We talked to them in Eilat when we filmed there. And they are from Kiryat Shmona, which is the northern part of Israel.
Northernmost part of the country.
It's a completely different place. They have no jobs. The children have no official structure for school. That you cannot cook. They eat at the hotel every day. They cannot cook. They have no future. It's a very complicated, and this is not just a few. It's like close to 100,000 Israelis.
Yeah. So we're both people of faith, of varying degrees, I should say. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about myself, depending on the day and the week.
I'm optimistic. There is a.
But I swing between. I don't want to call it despair. I'm not despaired, but I swing between, a sense of deep apprehension of how can we possibly resolve these problems without incredible violence, without forever being,
in these wars.
In these wars. And at the same time, the deep knowledge, and this is deeply rooted within me, and I think in every person of faith, that God is sovereign, and God has a sovereign plan. God controls what happens in this world. And he's more than that. He's been faithful throughout history.
Yeah.
And we look at the level of enemies that we're facing, the numbers of the enemies we're facing, the weaponry of the enemies we face, and we shouldn't have been here today. Not forget like next month. We should have already been annihilated time and time again.
And last week.
And and I'm not talking about like the 6-day war. I'm talking about like 10 days ago.
Yeah.
And we've been, again, like you can, in retrospect, you say, well, of course these things worked out in our favor. Nonsense.
Not of course.
Nonsense. If on the day of, we had all reason in the world to be completely afraid and terrified of what was going to happen. And tomorrow and next week, we have reason to be concerned to a deep degree of what's happening here. And yet I have this inner peace of knowing that, things are going to work out according to God's plan, because they always have.
Definitely.
I don't know how it's going to work. I have no idea what our prime minister and the people in our, defense cabinet can say that would like somehow like solve all these issues, or even 70% of these issues in real time.
10%. I don't think they have an idea.
I don't have the answer. Who knows? Who knows what?
But in general, listen, I think that's cool about believing in God, because he doesn't expect us to know 10 steps ahead. He expects us to deal with the situation in front of us. Yeah. And we believe that, he did not give us more than we can chew. So we need to deal with the situation today, tomorrow, maybe next week or 2 weeks ahead, and then he takes care of the rest. Yeah. So I think and we can see it. We can see it in his faithfulness when Iran attacked us. It's definitely a miracle. I don't know of a technology.
Plural. Miracles.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know of a technology that is 99% accurate. Like my phone is malfunctioning every day on just stupid stuff. So the entire missile defense system of Israel that wasn't tested at this level ever succeeded in 99%. And then our Arabs from other countries united in helping us. So we see God's hand in every step of the way here, and that's very encouraging.
Here's what we know. God is sovereign. God has always been faithful. And we also know that he never said it would be easy. And he never said it would be without sacrifice. Yeah. So we've experienced a whole lot of not easy and sacrifices. But to live in this land of promise, and to live in this place of promise, and this reality that is a fulfillment of 100 compounded miracles together, you have to see God's hand in it. And I do. Yeah. And I think many people in the state of Israel do today see that. I want to take a quick break to talk to our viewers. Okay. And say that if you've been watching this at home or listening to this at home and you want to get behind what we're doing here in Israel, we have a very strong mission of continuing to tell the story of what God is doing in this land through the Jewish people, through the people in the land of Israel. And for that to continue happening, we need you to do two things. We need you to subscribe. We need you to watch. We need you to share. That's the first one. And then we need you to support it actively. There's a donate link on the bottom of the description of this podcast, wherever you're listening to it. Yeah. And on most of our platforms, there's a way to directly support. And also subscribing itself supports what we're doing here. Definitely. And I want to do a whole lot more of this. Yeah. I want people around the world to be able to hear what's happening here in Israel in an unfiltered way. We're here on the ground. We've been doing this for a long time. Both of us. We've been born here, raised here. We're part of the IDF. Yeah. Both of us have been doing content for over a decade. We want people to hear about what's happening here, because there's a positive and there's something that is uplifting and hopeful of what God is doing in this land. Yes, Mati, definitely 100% right. And I think that we've been saying this a lot, but whatever happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. Yeah. And why? Because Israel is not special. The people of Israel are not special. We are all sinners and we are bad people. But God had a covenant with the people of Israel. And he uses Israel today in order to show to the rest of the world and to each and every one of you back at home
that He's faithful. He's faithful to us. He saved us again from annihilation just a week ago. And He will be faithful to you in everything that you go through in your lives.
Yeah.
And that's why the enemy wants to destroy Israel, because he does not want you to look at Israel and say, my God is faithful to these people and He will be faithful to me. The enemy does not want that. Yeah. And that's what we're fighting. And this battle is fought on multiple fronts. On the front of the public opinion, which we need your help. We need your help in sharing with your friends, in subscribing, in telling your neighbors, and in a spiritual battle, which we need your help in prayer. The only way to fight a spiritual war is by praying. Okay? So please help us share the truth. Please help us pray.
Yeah.
And
there's one more thing they can do. There is a battle that is happening. We call this in Hebrew asbara. I'll call it the public international diplomacy. Yeah. There's a battle happening in the public eye, in the public opinions over what's happening here. Mm-hmm. And the battle for, in this time in history is not just about opinions, it's about what is really happening. Mm-hmm. And the media is overwhelmingly biased against Israel.
Yes.
And the media is overwhelmingly biased to produce and send out information that is flawed and many times false.
Yes.
So we need the people that are watching this at home. This is important. It's not enough to just nod your head, because there are many other people around you, your family, your friends, your constituency, your church, your workplace, that need to hear about this. Mm-hmm. So what you can do is you can share the podcast, and we need this especially since it's a new podcast. Share the content itself, comment on the content, and send it to other people directly. And when you do that, even if it's just one person, if many people do this, it will have a large effect.
Yeah.
Look at the demonstrations taking place now in the U.S. I mean, these people are so detached from the reality of what's happening on the ground. Mm-hmm. We've almost overnight after October 7th, we switched from the Hamas brutally tortured, raped, murdered, mutilated the bodies of dead children, adults, innocent people in Israel. The next day, people are demonstrating against the state of Israel.
Yes.
There are people that they lack, and there's no way to look at this without seeing that there's a spiritual war at hand. They lack the basic human empathy to see that you can suffer on both sides, not just the Israeli side.
Yeah.
So the information war here is real completely.
Yeah.
We need people to share. We need people to talk about this.
And Mati, the enemy is doing a good job. They do quality videos. They do quality demonstrations. We need to give them a fight. We need to be better. We need to do better quality stuff. We need to be stronger. We need to share more. We need to be more vocal, okay, in the truth. Because we're sharing the truth. We're not sharing lies. We need to shout the truth stronger and louder than our enemies.
Look, if someone's stuck with us till this point, we've been talking for a while. Here we say in Hebrew, this is for people that do the Black Diamond Trail, the high-level trail. We're thinking about doing some more in-depth content, more than just the podcast. Like, there are some stories that are happening in this part of the world that really take time to tell properly. And we're working on them, and we're going to make some of this information available to others to get behind in the near future. We've been talking about some projects that I'm getting super excited about.
Definitely. Not just in the studio.
No, not in the studio.
Going to the locations,
there are things happening in Israel and in the region around us that when you really understand why they're happening and how they're happening, for me at least, I mean, it clicks things into place in the world. And you suddenly understand something about the way this region operates, the way the world operates around us. And we're going to be telling some really crazy stories. Yeah. And we're going to be making some of them available to some of our audience in the future. I'm getting excited just thinking about it.
No, definitely. It's going to be a fun year. I think it's going to be a fun, impactful, very important year for us. Yeah. And I hope that you will join us in this journey this year. So I think, Mati, it was a pleasure to talk to you again today. Let's do this again next week.
Yeah.
And every week after that, as long as people will still want to listen and to watch us. And if you have any questions, topics that you want us to discuss, please share. Send this to us on an email. Go to our website at www.tbnisrael.com or just on the comment box here at our YouTube channel. So please be part of this conversation. And we will also try to make this podcast live and we can interact with you immediately. That's another step of the way.
It's coming soon.
Yeah,
and also just to say a word of warning, the only way to support anything that we're doing here is only through the official TBN platforms.
Correct.
And we've had some issues with people who are in no way, shape, or form connected to anything we're doing. Try to directly fundraise for other things, and we don't know who they are.
Yeah.
So if you want to support, if you want to follow, make sure it's a verified account or it's on a TBN dot something account.
Yeah.
Very important.
Cool. Well,
Yair, hey,
have a nice day.
high five.
By the way,
Today
this month is my 1 year anniversary at TBN. So I'm having a good time. Thanks for the phone call to bring me to the team. I appreciate it a lot, and I'm enjoying my time.
I marked 10 years. Was it last month? Several weeks ago. This month. 10 years.
Okay.
It's been a ride.
Definitely. Not boring.
We'll see everyone else. Next week, we're going to be doing this on a consistent basis, and we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Iran next week. So stay tuned.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.